BMW's R1200 GS, the water-cooled version, is probably going to go down in history as the bike that changed everything. While its predecessors started the shift with long way round and long way down, really the water-cooled version made a huge shift in what we thought was possible from an adventure bike. As a result, the 1200 GS became a super well-loved bike and it sold incredible numbers. So when BMW start to get to that point where they're considering updating it, and they've obviously been working on it for a long time, we definitely get scared. It's always nerve-wracking when a manufacturer wants to update their bike because nobody wants a bike that they love to get worse than it was. But thankfully BMW haven't done that. They took everything that was good about the 1200 GS and they baked it into the new 1250 and then made it better. And honestly, I could end the review right there, but that's not what we do here. The core difference in the new 1250 GS versus the old 1200 GS is in the engine. Most of the bike has actually stayed the same, but the engine received a host of new updates that have made a really big difference to the performance. The first of those is the introduction of the new shift cam technology, which basically is a variable valve timing system, and that's not a new idea. BMW have put their own slant on it, and actually it's pretty simple. It's not a complicated piece of technology, and the end result is really good. On the numbers front, BMW have taken the 1250 GS from a bike that was kind of lagging a little bit behind in terms of outright power figures to KTM and Ducati and the other big adventure bikes, and they've put it right back in the mix. It's now the torquiest adventure bike in the class by a long way, and the power numbers are right back in the mix. BMW clearly with that engine favor having huge amounts of torque, and the end result is an engine that's really easy to ride, but definitely makes a lot more progress than it used to. Translating this into actual real world riding, the end result is a 1250 GS that's better on the street than it was. The bike still handles fantastically, but I think the engine has a lot more flexibility than it used to. The old 1200 GS definitely favored a torquey riding style with relatively low RPM and big gears, so we're always shifting early and using that torque to pull you out of a corner. And while you could rev it and you could ride it high in the RPM, I don't think it was a bike that enjoyed that. With the 1250, that shift has started to change a little bit. BMW have increased the torque so much that you can definitely pull ridiculous gears all the time, and to the point where your gear selection doesn't actually matter that much. But by adding in a load more power than they used to have and keeping it at a relatively high RPM, if you're a rider that's coming from a not torquey bike or you don't like pulling gears, the GS is now a much more flexible platform for you. Where BMW have really nailed the 1250 GS is in making the new bike so similar to the old bike. The 1200 GS was an incredible street bike. It was easy to ride, you could make swift progress, it handled well, and it was really forgiving. And the 1250 GS has lost none of that. It feels almost identical, but with a much punchier engine. That punchier engine means you can pull taller gears. If you like to rev it out, you can rev it out. But really the biggest improvements are in the little details. The first time I downshifted for a roundabout and fed the clutch out, I actually laughed. It was unbelievable how smooth the bike was. It's as smooth as any bike I've ever ridden on roll-on. In fact, I think the only bike that's comparable is maybe the Tiger 800, which has incredible fueling. The 1250 GS is in that category of an incredibly well-fueled bike. And as you roll on out of a corner, there's no lump, there's no bump, there's no upset. It's super smooth. But more impressively than that is that the 1250 GS does that in reverse. So when you shut the throttle coming into a corner or for a roundabout and you feed the clutch out, it's an incredibly linear experience. And it kind of takes your breath away the first time it happens. That smoothness on roll-off makes the bike really easy to ride. It doesn't upset the handling in any way. So as you come into a corner and you roll off the throttle and start to lean in, you don't get that lunge or that lurch that kind of upsets things a little bit. It makes the whole corner experience much easier. The last really noticeable improvement in the engine and the street riding of the 1250 GS is in the delivery of the shift cam. A lot of bikes with variable valve timing have struggled to get rid of the step where the timing changes, and you'd be hard pushed to find out where that is on the GS. I couldn't find it. It's completely smooth and just pulls consistently in a really beautiful linear motion through the rev range. And that makes it a fantastically easy bike to ride. You don't have to worry about the fueling changing halfway through the power in the middle of a corner and upsetting anything. It's silky smooth all the time. And so everything that was good about the old GS and how easy it was to ride on the street has been carried over, and the new engine is better. When it comes to riding on the street, the new GS is just as good as the old one. There have been a few updates to the ESA system, the electronic suspension, and in theory that should make a little bit of a difference, but in practical riding without putting them back to back, I don't think it's super easy to notice that difference. The good news about that is that everything that worked on the old bike, everything that made that old bike handle really well is still there. You've still got the telelever system, which if you're coming from a GS, you probably really like, and if you're coming from a conventional fork bike, may take some adjusting to. But for us, the beauty of that telelever system as it is that it lets you get away with a lot. If you're a novice rider or you haven't got a lot of experience of decent cornering technique, that telelever takes out a lot of the guesswork. It's really forgiving. You can get away with doing things that you probably can't do on a conventional fork bike, and all in, that makes the GS a really, really easy bike to ride and a really easy bike to live with on the day-to-day. That brings us neatly into the off-road riding. We love the old GS off-road. It had some quirks, it had some weird bits, but as an all-round package for an adventure bike, it's unbelievably capable. The limit of that bike is really how you ride it and not the actual bike itself. The telelever suspension, again, can have some weird handling quirks. It doesn't like big bumps, it doesn't like big bumps in a row. But if you respect that, the balance at low speed and the gentle delivery off the bottom at low RPM lets you do things with that GS that you simply can't do with other adventure bikes. Once you start to get your head around it, the delivery lets you ride it almost like a big trials bike. You can use the torque right at the low RPM, the clutch delivery is really nice, the brakes are really good, and as a result we can do things and get that bike to places that we shouldn't be able to for such a big bike. Now the concern with the 1250 GS and more power and more torque is that you start to lose that characteristic. That's a characteristic that I personally really like coming from a dirt bike riding background, and the new 1250 hasn't lost that. From the bottom all the way up to the mid-range, it feels almost identical, to the point where I think you'd be hard pushed if you weren't looking down to know that it was a new bike. And that's a really good thing. Where things start to change is once you go over that mid-range point. Once the bike starts to pull higher into the revs, things go warp speed really quickly. That end of the power range is way closer to the KTM and the Ducati than it was, and whether that's a good thing is up to you. Fortunately, the overall package off-road hasn't really changed that much, and for us that's a good thing. The 1200 GS is a crazy capable bike. It's super, super good, and it's always one of our favorite bikes to ride if we know we've got technical off-road planned. No bike is perfect, and the GS isn't exempt. There are a few little quirks and changes and things that have got some people upset, and a few things that we've noticed after spending a lot of time on the bike that we don't like. The first point of contention that has come up a lot is the change of the front brake. BMW went away from using a Brembo front brake on the 1250, and a lot of people have said that they've noticed it and they don't like it and so on. And honestly, in the riding we've done with that bike, we can't tell a difference. Maybe if you paid a lot of attention and you rode them back to back in the same conditions, you would notice that difference, but the general riding experience is still really good. The brakes on the 1250 are awesome brakes. They work really, really well, just like they did on the old bike. It stops quickly, it stops efficiently, and they feel nice. The first on our list of nitpicky items is the handguards. The handguards don't do a lot, they're kind of just there for show. They don't protect any levers if you fall off, they come loose really easily. They're attached to the handguard mount, which is kind of weird. But highest on the list is they just don't really offer much wind protection. So when the weather's cold and crappy, the handguards are doing nothing, and they would definitely, if it was our bike, be the first thing to go. Second on the list, and this is something we probably noticed only because it's winter here and it's really cold, but the GS doesn't have a heated seat, and that makes you sound a little bit soft, but everything else in the riding package is really warm. Your hands are warm because you've got heated grips and you're wearing warm kit and maybe a heated base layer. And then they don't offer a heated seat as any part of the package. Now, all the other brands offer one. I believe you get one installed with the second cylinder on a Ducati Multistrada. The KTM comes with a heated seat, and so does the Triumph. It's a bit odd that BMW didn't offer that, but in the grand scheme of the bike, it's really not a big deal. All in, the 1250 GS is an incredible bike. It does everything the old bike did, so it's a great street bike, it's a great highway bike, it's really good off-road, and it's really easy to ride. And they made it slightly better. The engine is nicer all round. It fuels better, it's more powerful, it's more torquey. And the biggest surprise was that by making it more linear and more smooth, they didn't detract from the riding experience. Overall, the riding experience is more fun than it was. The engine is more fun despite being more linear, which is a really, really big deal. They haven't Honda-fied the bike. They haven't made it too smooth that it's not fun anymore. It's definitely really torquey through the mid-range, and it puts a smile on your face every time you turn the throttle. When you add into that package that the finish is really good, that the controls and the TFT screen and the user interface and the way the cruise control works and the way the heated grips work, when you add all that together, you get this incredibly well done bike. However, it is not a cheap bike. It's a little bit more expensive than it used to be because they've added a few items in that used to be optional equipment, so now it comes with an LED headlight as standard. But the real question is whether the 1250 GS represents value or not. If you're coming from the point where you own a 1200 GS, a water-cooled 1200 GS, then I don't really think it does. I can't tell you to upgrade because spending X amount of money for a 5% increase in performance of your bike is hard to justify. However, if you're in the position where you're coming into the GS from a new place, I'm definitely going to tell you that the 1250 is the better option. It's an awesome bike, it really is. Now, if you're walking in to buy yourself your first GS, that comes down to price and ultimately your budget. If you're looking at a brand new bike, the 1250 GS is incredible. It's better than a 1200 GS was, and the tech and the performance and the all-round usability definitely put it right at the top of the food chain. This is pretty much as good as a bike gets in the adventure bike segment. Its all-round performance is huge, and I think if you ever bought one, you're never going to be disappointed with the way it rides and the way it feels and the finish and so on. So if you like this video and you think it's a good review, hit that like button and throw a comment down below. What do you think of the new 1250? What do you think of the color scheme? It's definitely been a little bit controversial. Let us know in the comments. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching, and remember, life's better when you're riding.